You're watching Cetome TV. Knowledge is power.
So the three different types of receptors that we have in breast cancer, could you scroll? Oh, there we go. Beautiful. Nice job, Michelle. Is we have the estrogen receptor, and we have the HER2, a human epidermal growth factor receptor 2, and then we have what's called triple negative breast cancer. We also have the progesterone receptor, but it's somewhat associated with estrogen positivity, and it's not really a target of any sort of treatments. So in order for a breast cancer to be a breast cancer, it has a higher abundance of these receptors than a normal cell. So in a normal cell, you will have a certain amount of estrogen receptors. And when estrogen, which is referred to as the ligand, and a ligand is something that binds the receptor, when that ligand binds the receptor, it causes that receptor to go through a conformational change. In other words, it changes its shape, much like when you touch, one of those plants that eats flies. I forget what they're called. When you touch them and the leaves immediately close, that's much like a receptor. And so it changes its shape, and that causes it to send a signal down to the interior of the cell to do something. So in the case of estrogen receptor and estrogen, when estrogen binds the outside of the estrogen receptor, it causes that cell to grow and copy itself. And this is an important thing if you're dealing with a breast cell. So in estrogen positive breast, can you go back up a bit, please, Michelle?
Sure, yep.
Yeah. Maybe I could give you a ding when I want you to slide down.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Just take me.
So when the estrogen ligand binds the receptor, it causes it to grow and develop. And that's important when you're going through pregnancy or when you're going through your standard monthly cycle. And women's breasts typically get bigger due to the estrogen, and that's an important process. The problem is when you have too many of these estrogen receptors. And when you have too many of them, what can happen is a small amount of estrogen can bind, and then these cells can grow uncontrollably because they're getting overstimulated from a small amount of estrogen. So with the progesterone receptor, it can occur with estrogen receptor or without. It doesn't seem to make a big difference in how it's treated, but it's another thing that they look at. And so then you also have the HER2 receptor. And the HER2 receptor functions very much the same as the estrogen receptor, except it's what we call a ligand-independent receptor. There are actually 4 human epidermal growth factor receptors. And what happens is the ligand will bind one of those other receptors, and then it will bind with the HER2 receptor, and that will turn it on. So instead of having a direct binding, it gets activated by one of the other receptors in a process called dimerization, where 2 receptors come together. And then in triple negative is when you don't have any of these receptors. So in other words, you do have the receptors, they're just all at a normal level. They're not at an overexpressed level or a higher level. So these receptors are always present. It's just the state of them being over expressed, having too many of them on a cell is what is defined as having an estrogen positive or HER2 positive breast cancer. So you always have some of these receptors in a normal healthy cell, but you have too many in an unhealthy cell.
Thank you for watching Cetome TV. Subscribe below and stay informed.